I want you to hear the story of emotional conflicts in a victim of congenital syphilis.
Let's take you back to the time when you were about 18 years of age. Did you go to high school, Florence?
No, I wanted to, but I couldn't.
Uh-huh. Then at 18 you'd probably be, well, you'd probably married by that time, were you?
No, I married when I was 19.
All right. Let's take you back to the time then when you were 18. And you were working when you were 18, is that right, I imagine? Or were you just living at home?
I was living at home, but my mother had to go to a nursing home because of illness and my father's drinking. Our home was broke up.
Mm-hmm. Then this wasn't a very happy time for you, was it, when you were 18?
Never. We were always afraid of my father.
Uh-huh. All right, now, Florence, I want to ask you something when you're 18 years of age. Have you had any, that is, don't talk about the illness that the doctor told me about. Don't mention that one at all. You don't have to, and there's no necessity for it. By 18, I want to find out if things at home, the emotions, the high emotions and the unpleasantness that you knew, have they resulted in any illnesses for you other than that which you were born with?
Nothing, only nerves.
Nerves, but they have resulted in a strong emotionalism because of the tensions at home, is that right? But when hay fever season comes along, you go right through it without having any signs of hay fever, isn't that right? Now, Florence, let's get to the time of your first marriage. I just want you to tell me something. You're about 19 and you're getting married. Are you in love with this man that you're marrying?
I think I am.
Are you sure you just aren't trying to get away from home or you're very unhappy?
I think I was trying to get away from home, too.
In other words, it's a combination of both. Is that it? Now, you're married to him. It's the first marriage. Tell me, how are you getting along?
Everything's a disappointment to me.
In other words, just jumping from the frying pan into the fire, is that it? Have you had any emotional problems? You remember you were just a bunch of nerves when you were 18. Now you're 19, you're married, and things aren't even as good as they were probably at home by this time. Has it affected you in any way? I mean, have you had any illnesses because of it or anything, or are you able to bear up under it pretty well?
No, I almost had a nervous breakdown after my second child was born.
Mm-hmm. That would be a couple of years later, isn't that right?
That was when I was 24.
Mm-hmm.
No, 22.
All right, now, you got married and immediately did you get pregnant, is that it?
10 months later, exactly, from the day of my marriage, my first born was born.
Mm-hmm. And were you happy with that first baby?
Very.
Very happy. In other words, that compensated a little bit, did it, for the fact that you were married and quite unhappy about the marriage?
Well, I was happy with my baby.
But not happy with your husband, is that right?
No, he drank.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't paying bills.
But you still stuck by him, and then you found yourself pregnant again.
That's right.
Tell me about the second pregnancy. Was that...
Well, I had gotten yellow jaundice, I believe, when I was about 2 months pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And I got awfully sick, and I went to the hospital, and they had given me too much medicine. They said, they led me to believe that's what the cause of my yellow jaundice, the medicine I was taking for this illness that I had that I was born with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I was awfully nervous all the while. I carried him in short of breath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I never got much sympathy from my husband because he drank a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had a fear of dying. Well,
Yes, that's what I wanted you to tell me. And when I snap my fingers, you'll tell me the first time you ever got this fear of death. When was it? Because this is probably the whole cause of your hay fever and everything.
I felt all the while I carried him that I wasn't going to live.
Mm-hmm. Because it was just about this time that it was revealed to you about the illness that you were born with, was that it?
No, I never knew anything about it till I was ready to get married, and they told me I didn't even know what the word meant.
Yeah, I know. We won't discuss it, Florence. You don't have to worry about going into privacy at all. Was it when you got that horrible shock? Was that when you got this morbid fear of death?
Yes, I probably did. I knew my mother was always sick, and they told me that was the reason for her illness. I was afraid I would get crippled up like she was, and I wouldn't live beyond maybe 22 or 3 years old. Something I didn't know.
You didn't know what the word meant when they told you what the illness was?
No, I didn't.
Now, Florence, you can understand that I can't divulge to the doctors here or anybody about that illness. Just we know that you were born with it, and that was no fault of yours, and that you went all through childhood without knowing that this illness was a part of your being. And then when you were just ready to be married, and you thought all was well and you were going to get out of this frying pan, then they told you. Is that right? Who told you? Was it your father and mother who told you, or who was it?
My father, he died before I was married.
Then who told you?
I think it was my oldest sister. Said, I don't know it. She knew it. She was born with it, and so was I. And she thought that I ought to know it. I was treated since I was 11, but I thought I was anemic all the time. That's what they told me.
Nobody ever told you. But the results were good, and you did get rid of this illness entirely, so you have nothing to worry about there. Now, Florence, if a girl goes all through her lifetime, all through her formative years, believing one thing and then gets the horrible shock that you got when you were just ready to get married, can you see how, if she doesn't even know the name of the illness and all of a sudden she hears it and she's never heard it before, can you imagine all the myriad, the many, many fears that would enter her mind? Here's something she's not responsible for, she had nothing to do with it, and here she's being apparently punished for something she knew nothing about. And that's exactly the feeling you had, wasn't it?
I was frightened to death about it. After they told me what it was, but then my doctor told me. He tried to explain to me. But
now,
it's all right.
Now look, Florence, there are a lot of doctors here, and every doctor here probably realizes the seriousness of the case. That is, the seriousness of the case as it was revealed to you as a young girl of 17 or 18, learning just before her marriage of a congenital illness. She'd never heard the name of the illness. She just knew she'd been treated since she was 11 years old for something that she thought was entirely different. Then all of a sudden she is given a picture of something devastating, something awful. And she's told that she has it, not through her own fault, but because she inherited it. Do you think that any person in this room, Florence, would have reacted any differently than you did?
No, I didn't.
You know that they wouldn't. You know that if I'd have heard such a thing about myself, or if any doctor here had heard that about himself or herself, that every one of us would have been frightened to death. And that's where your morbid fear of death came in, don't you see? But you see, Florence, there's something you don't know about the human emotions. This acted as a traumatic incident, a trauma, an emotional situation with which you could not cope. Do you understand? There was no way for you to handle the situation. You had nothing to do with the making of the situation, but here is something you were in. You were in the midst of it, and you were apparently the one taking it on the chin, and you'd had nothing to do with the creation of the dilemma. And when you heard that this thing was something that could kill, and you'd had it since birth, had it for 18 years, just about, isn't it quite natural that you should have thought of death? Those congenital cases of illness such as you had can be completely cured. Is that correct, Dr. Steiner? Will you say it out loud so that Florence knows it?
Certainly is true.
Now, in other words, Florence, once you got rid of the illness, and you did, you know that. You know there's no trace of it in you now. Once you got rid of the illness, you had not gotten rid of the trauma. Do you see what I mean? The shock. And so the morbid fear of death remained. And Florence, that fear of death has been with you every day since then, hasn't it? Did you know that even before you got up here into this chair, that Dr. Steiner was kind enough to tell me that you had this morbid fear? And now, you see how pronounced it was that you hadn't been sitting here more than a few minutes before you yourself came out with it. But now, look, Florence, the disease is gone. The illness is gone. All that remained was the trauma, that is, the shock, the situation with which you could not cope. But that situation no longer exists. Do you see what I mean? And since the situation no longer exists, there's nothing for you to cope with. Except what? Except the shock that was given to you when you were a little girl, a young girl. Now, Florence, talking it over when your awareness is about 2,000% above normal, I think it puts that fear in a completely different light, doesn't it? It lets you see that this was all right for you to have as a young kid of 18, where you had every reason to be frightened. But there's no more reason for you to be frightened than there is for any person in this room to be frightened. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're not going to have those fears anymore. And as a result, you're going to find, I believe, that you're going to live a much happier life, because from this point on, you'll be able to put that fear into its proper place in your life, that this was just a shock. It was a horrible shock, sure, and nobody here would care to go through such a terrible situation. But having gone through it, it didn't hurt you an iota. The illness was gotten rid of. The only thing that wasn't gotten rid of was the shock. And we're getting rid of the shock now by letting you see it again. Let's go on a little bit. It may be that fear is also the cause of the hay fever. I don't know. It was probably the cause of your near breakdown when you were carrying your second child, and then after the second child was born, when you almost had the breakdown, that was caused by the fear, wasn't it? Let's find out if the hay fever is caused by the fear. I'm going to take you to the first time that you ever had a hay fever attack. I'm going to take you right to it. 2 years ago, this is your second marriage now. And how old are your new babies?
The youngest is 5, and the other one will be 8 in August.
Mm-hmm. How were the children 2 years ago?
Hi.
How were the children that were living with the aunt and the one in service and so on? How were they?
They were all right.
But there was worry about them?
Mark had an accident.
That's what I want to get at. Now we're getting at the cause, aren't we?
Well, and I'm also recalling the trouble we had there in our neighborhood.
Yes. Now we're coming to the very time when you had that first attack of hay fever. I want you to tell me about the trouble that you had in the neighborhood. If it's the type of thing that you'd rather not talk about, you don't have to talk about it, so long as you know about it. Do you want to talk about it?
Well,
you'd rather not talk about it. All right.
Person just tried to hurt my husband, that's all. I'm too involved.
Mm-hmm. But
that seems to come to my mind, that and Mark's accident.
Yes. And that's when the hay fever first came up. So we'll take you to the minute that the hay fever first came up, and we'll find out whether it was Mark's accident or whether it was your husband's, this bad person in the neighborhood. So when I snap my fingers, it'll be the first time that you ever had a hay fever attack. Where are you? When is it?
I seem to be at home.
Yes, and where are you?
In the front room.
In the front room. What's been happening?
All I can remember is Mark's accident.
Mark's accident. And Mark is your son?
Yeah.
And he's one of the two boys that is not with you.
Mark is my baby.
Well, Mark is your baby. He is with you. So when your little baby had the accident is when the first attack of asthma came on. Is that it?
I guess so. I mean, that's all I can think of.
Yes, because the two things are interwoven. Why were you worried about his accident? What kind of an accident was it?
Well, I was going to go shopping, and my oldest daughter was across the street. She's 15 with two relations of my husband, nieces, I believe, that were up to visit us from the country.
Yeah.
And they had taken Mark across the street and were waiting there by my car.
Mm-hmm.
And I was locking up the door and started out, and Mark started across to me. And I seen this car coming, and I screamed, and I hollered, and it wasn't coming very fast. I just knew Mark was going to get run over and killed. And did hit him.
But very badly, was he?
No, he got all right.
Yeah.
But he
So
was
you
just
see,
frightened. And
yes, and so were you. So were you. So were you. Because you can see by the very reliving of it how frightened you were. But can you see that that would cause any mother who had been through an emotional experience such as your own to manifest emotional symptoms after that? Because in addition to her own morbid fear of death, now she would have morbid fears of death regarding her own child, wouldn't she? And that was it, wasn't it?
I guess so. I have a terrible love for my children. In some way, I always feel like they're going to be taken from me, or I'm going to be taken from them.
No, you don't have to have any worries about that. Don't you see where that thought came from, Florence? Don't you see what that thought came from? A nice little girl of 18 is all of a sudden told that she is the possessor of something horrible, over which she had no control and over which she didn't even have a chance to go out and get herself, but was foisted on her by her sires. Now she's the victim. Thanks to modern medicine, she's able to get rid of the illness, but she's not able to get rid of the first fear when she was told about the illness, because the illness sounded horrible to her. Her own morbid fears of death proceeded over the years, and every day went by and she had those fears in her mind. Then all of a sudden, she sees her child get injured by a car. Florence, I want to ask you something. If that happened to anybody else in this room who had a background similar to your own, don't you think they would have reacted with an emotional illness of some kind? Do you think you're any different? Not a bit different, Florence. What happened to you would have happened to anybody, because both times you were up against a situation with which you could not cope. You couldn't prevent the accident to Mark, could you? There was nothing you could do. You couldn't prevent this illness that you had, which was of no fault of your own. Each time, death was connected with those incidents. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The thought of death was connected with the first illness. The thought of death was connected with Mark. Now she's not only afraid of herself, afraid for herself, but now she's afraid for her children, too. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So what happens? She begins to manifest symptoms. Isn't that right?
I guess so.
Well, do you know that to be so?
Yes.
You know that's so. Florence, now that you know that's so, do you think there's any need for you ever to have hay fever again?
No.
Does this give you a new insight into the hay fever, something that you never had before?
Yes, it does.
You're going to find that from this point on, you won't have any hay fever. Because if we've done anything, we've certainly removed that first fear, haven't we? And we've certainly removed that second fear, because Mark is quite all right now, and so are your other children, and things are going well with them, aren't they? And you have a husband who certainly loves you, or he wouldn't be here tonight. You know that. Isn't that so?
Yes.
And he isn't the sort of a man you had for a first husband, is he?
No.
He's a man in whom you can give your love devotedly and honestly and get it back 100%, isn't it?
Yes.
And you know that he's awfully interested in having you a well woman. He doesn't want you to have hay fever anymore. You're going to find as a result of this that even those polyps that you have there, which have been characterized as allergic polyps, you're going to find now that you don't need them anymore. You don't need them anymore. You don't need the hay fever anymore. You're not going to have the morbid fears of death. Going to be erased completely. You're going to have the normal fears that any person has, but they won't be morbid fears. I want you to take care of yourself and of your children. I'm not saying you go out and get run over by a car or anything like that, because I think the fact that you should have normal fears is the same kind of fears that everybody else in this room has. But I don't want them to be morbid anymore. I don't want them to overbalance I want you to take good care of yourself and of your children, and you'll find that there is no need of these fears at all, and that they are absolutely groundless, because they were groundless in the first place. Do you see what I mean? Mark didn't get killed, so that fear was groundless. You didn't die from the illness, instead you got well from it. So that instead of looking forward towards blackness, look forwards towards light. I want that life of yours from now on to be full of life and light, and not thoughts of death. And I don't think you'll have any hay fever at all. In fact, Doctor, would you give us a report on this case as time goes by? I don't think it's necessary to do anything more with her. I think that she's going to be completely well as a result of what we got out tonight. How do you feel about it, Florence?
Fine.
You know you're going to be well, don't you?
Yes, I do.
All right, so when I have you open your eyes, you're just going to feel grand. All right, open your eyes. How do you feel?
All right.
Good. Okay, I think you're going to be okay. I'm afraid you're going to be well.